Welcome to Poor Historian, where history slows its breathing and the small sounds of ordinary lives can finally be heard. Tonight, we return to a village without street lamps or clocks, where smoke curls from a thatched roof and the world is stitched together by chores, footsteps, and the hush between them. If stories like these help you loosen your shoulders and rest a little easier, settle in. Dim the lights, take a slow sip of something warm, and let the room grow quiet around you. We'll move gently, the way a lantern moves through a doorway, without hurry, without spectacle, simply enough to see. Open the wooden door with me. Its stick swollen by last week's rain, then yields with a soft groan. Inside is a single room, and everything a year requires a low hearth, a table, a ladder to the loft, a bundle of rushes for the floor, and a bed that is more idea than furniture. You can hear the wind's long sentence at the eaves, the faint talk of animals beyond the wall, the creak of rope, the sigh of old wood settling. A thin line of firelight keeps the dark from touching certain corners. Here, in this warmth, the size of a palm, people learn to live together, awkwardly, tenderly, imperfectly, and to survive. This is not a story about spectacle. It's about how love looks when there is no spare room for it, how affection makes do with rickety benches and borrowed blankets, how shyness hides in plain sight, how a glance becomes a promise because words are too expensive to spend. You will not find velvet here. You will find hands roughened by tools, faces chapped by wind and laughter that comes in short, bright bursts, because joy, like lamp oil, must be used sparingly. You will find faith too, sometimes worn like a cloak, sometimes like a stone in the pocket, weighty and private. And you will find superstition walking beside it, not as a rival but as a neighbour, a ribbon kept under a pillow, a sprig of herb hung in a lintel, a rhyme remembered at inconvenient hours. We will follow a year because a medieval village obeys seasons more faithfully than it obeys any lord. In spring the ground and the heart thaw at once. Desire returns first, as curiosity then, as courage. A longer conversation by the barn door, a shared cup at midday, a ribbon passed from sleeve to sleeve, with a smile that tries to be casual and fails. Summer is louder, work, shouts, sweat, testifies, and people meet each other in places where water steams and laughter carries at the bathhouse. The fair, the alehouse, where a song knows more than it says. Autumn draws a boundary and invites you to step over it. Vows by a church door, blessings that sound like jokes, and jokes that sound like blessings. A bed ceremonially strewn with good wishes and even better advice. And winter is when nearness becomes necessary. The land rests, people do not. They keep the fire, keep the stories, keep one another from the loneliness that knocks at the shutters like a branch in wind. If there is anything bizarre here, it is only the honesty of a life with few hiding places. Privacy is a modern luxury. In a one-room house, a gesture is a language, and silence is a crowded avenue. That is why customs grew where furniture did not rituals to protect the shy rules, to protect the vulnerable laughter, to protect everyone. What looks strange at a distance is often just survival up close. Before we begin, breathe with the room. Listen to the small chorus, a kettle, thinking about boiling a log, deciding where to crack the soft wicker of a horse beyond the door. If these quiet histories keep you company, you know what to do. Make yourself comfortable, stay a while, and let the rest of the world wait. We will be patient with our story and let it arrive in its own time. Tonight is not about heroes, it is about neighbours. About the way two people make a promise, with their backs turned to the crowd and their faces turned to the wind. about how a ribbon becomes a shield, how a song becomes a code, how a bed becomes a treaty between hope and fear. If you are ready, we will walk out into the lane, where puddles reflect a stubborn sliver of moon, then circle back to the hearth before the embers dim. A year is only 12 months, but it contains more kinds of courage than we remember. Let's begin. Spring, when the soil and the heart thaw. At first it is only sound, a drip from the eaves that does not freeze the drumming of water through thawing thatch the earth, clearing its throat. In the lane, last winter's ruts soften to a dark syrup, and boots go in with a patient, resigned noise. Carts complain, chickens fuss. Someone a field away shouts an order to an ox that will never learn it, and the ox answers with a long, ancient vowel that belongs to neither joy nor anger but to work. You stand in the doorway and breathe air that smells half of rot, half of promise. The exact perfume of spring in a poor village where the future is composted from last year's failures. Nothing in a medieval spring arrives all at once. The season is a slow negotiation between stubborn cold and a sun that has arguments to win somewhere else first. But it comes a little bolder every morning. The moss on the fence lifts its green like a curtain. A ribbon of water remembers its way down the ditch. In the loft, the hay looks more like memory than food, and the family measures meals by what is left. Someone says, not for the first time, that the winter has been long. Someone else does not answer, because the words are already worn thin with use. In poor places, you do not speak complaints more than they can pay for themselves. Spring means movement. Doors are propped open to air the dark out of them. Tools sulking all winter are coaxed into usefulness with grease and persuasion. Ploughs step into the light like old men trying to be graceful. Even the bed is pulled toward the window for an hour, so the mattress of straw can remember a shape that is not two people pressed into a valley of warmth. And in all this motion, the body remembers its own hunger, not only for bread, for greens, for milk that does not taste of desperation, but for company. The winter was a long room in which every sound had a sharp edge. Spring rounds the edges. You meet more eyes. Your smile comes back slowly, like someone returning from a journey. Courtship in such a village is not an event set apart by time or candlelight. It happens in the middle of everything else, between the folded blanket and the mended fence, between the nudge to the cow and the gossip at the well. The barn is its theatre, not because it is beautiful. It is not, but because it is busy, honest, and slightly away from the day's centre. There is room there for conversation that starts with hey and ends with something braver. You find her, let us say her, though it could be him by sound before sight, a rhythmic fork, fork, fork of hay, lifted and turned. Dust makes its own weather in the beam of light that comes through a missing board and makes saints' halos of whoever stands in it. When she looks up, she smiles past you at first, toward the door, toward the suggestion of sky, and then, as if it costs nothing at you. You say something small and workable, like morning or the thaw will ruin the lane, and that is enough, because the first duty of spring talk is to offer safe footing. You match her pace with the fork you let your sentences be, as long as a breath, and you learn to borrow the barn's casualness as a costume. Light joke number 1. The kind of thing that can live in daylight without embarrassment arrives as you both wrestle the same bale. The twine snaps, hay explodes, and you are baptized together in yellow. You cough, you laugh, and she says, if the saints mean to crown us, they might pick something that scratches less. The joke is nothing, and so it is everything. It says, I will notice with you. I will make the work gentler with words, which is sometimes the only way it gets gentler. You talk about weather as if it were a person with moods. You talk about the ox's cough. You talk about the neighbour's fence that has learned to lean in all four directions at once. Then you talk a little faster about the fair that will come when the road is no longer a swamp and the peddlers bring needles that shine like promises. You do not say, I want to walk there with you, because spring has rules and one of them is patience. Instead you say, they sometimes sell ribbons, and she answers, and sometimes a ribbon finds the right sleeve. The grammar is cautious, the meaning is not. Later at midday, you meet at the threshold between barn shade and yard glare. Bread is broken with the sideways efficiency of people who know exactly how much is left. A clove of garlic divides like a blessing. A little hard cheese, a joke about how cheese ages better than some men light. A joke number 2. A glance at the sky to borrow courage. The cows chew like metronomes. The air has warmed enough to carry scents again, and the stable offers its honest alphabet of them. You think of perfume which you have never owned, and decide there is a kind of perfume in this too. Hay's sweetness, leather's patience, the clean iron of a bucket, the faint yeasty promise from the barrel, where something is dreaming of being. Beer. If the barn is courtship's classroom, the well is its theatre. People gather there in a choreography that has been rehearsed for centuries lower. Fill, lift, pass, joke, listen. Privacy does not exist, so courtesy grew where privacy couldn't. Eyes learn to be clever. A compliment is disguised as weather. A complaint is folded into news. A question is answered privately by the angle of a head turned a fraction too far toward or away. You bring the bucket up together and pretend this is about weight. By the time the first festival stirs a maypole dragged from a copse with ceremony that will try to look accidental, the village has almost convinced itself it is ready to laugh. The pole is peeled and smoothed, not too carefully. Ribbons arrive from trunks like winter-stored birds. Someone who plays pipe and tabor warms his fingers and pretends he does not care if they respond. There will be food that is not merely food but permission buns, buttered beyond economy, a scattering of herbs. When herbs are dear, the first green shoots that taste mostly of hope. Children orbit the adults in steeper and steeper ellipses, then fling themselves toward the music, like ideas that cannot wait their turn. The dance is both simpler and more complicated than it looks. You move forward and back. You change hands. You laugh when you are supposed to laugh. You fail at grace in a way that makes the better dancers kinder. The ribbons cross and cross again, making an argument and a garment of colour around a tree that did not ask for this attention. A young man misses a step, and the whole village misses it with him, because that is how belonging works here. Your hand finds hers not by accident and not by plan, which is to say, by spring's arithmetic. It is a public handclasp that feels private the way a door can open in a crowd if 2 people agree to see it. Light joke number 3 is merciful. When the tabor player loses his beat and then triumphantly finds it 2 measures later, someone shouts, "He's thawing too," and the laughter relieves the dance of its need to be perfect. Perfection is for saints in windows. The living must make do with timing that works well enough to keep the ribbons from becoming a knot that can only be solved by knives. Tokens begin to circulate like small portable futures. A ribbon changes sleeves and then lingers there long after the dance has ended, as if time has been persuaded to stop long enough to think about its manners. Someone finds a primrose on the verge and pretends it had always been meant for someone else's hand. A bit of bread is wrapped in cloth and carried not because it is food, but because it is a message I thought of you when both of us were hungry. At the ale bench later, someone carves a mark into the wood and says nothing about it, trusting that the mark will say enough when fingers meet it again next week. None of this is lavish. Spring cannot afford lavishness, and anyway, the village has come to prefer meanings that can survive the washing. You tuck the ribbon into the lining of your sleeve where your skin can learn it. She tucks the primrose into a place where it will wilt with dignity. The world is modest, but modesty is not emptiness. There are whole cities hiding in these gestures, and both of you know their streets by heart. A fair opens on a day when the clouds have finally accepted their defeat and moved on to argue with a different county. Peddlers arrive with satchels and boxes that smell of elsewhere spices, paper glass, with bubbles trapped like insects' needles, so bright they schedule their own attention. People practice the art of browsing, which is to say, the art of wanting less than you want. A man with a trained goose tells fortunes for a penny. The goose always selects the future that requires the least arguing. At a table covered by a cloth so clean, it must be new lengths of ribbon pool in 100 shades of joy. You say lightly that blue would suit her, and she says lightly that blue would be wasted on her because the sky has already taken all of it. The seller smiles like someone who rents out small dreams. You buy blue anyway. It is not the buying that matters so much as the ceremony that follows. You do not place the ribbon directly in her palm because someone might notice the directness and make it into town talk. You pass it in the shadow of a wagon when both of you are pretending to consider the price of a pan with a dent that looks deliberate. In that shadow, the blue is richer than the sky could ever be. She folds it once, twice, as if it were a letter from a future that can read. You both step back into the light, having agreed without saying so that the shadow itself was a room with a door and a window and a small table on which 2 cups of something warm have been set. Spring is not all dancing. Work resumes its rightful tyranny. The field demands lines straight enough to satisfy a geometry that no one has studied formally, but everyone can feel with the soles of their feet. The ox, having wintered badly like everyone else, remembers forward 1 step at a time. Plough handles bruise the same places on the same hands they bruised last year and the year before, and back into a history that knew different kings but the same ache. Yet even here the season leaves room for something gentler, a race of glances across a furrow, a call for help that is actually an invitation to stand closer and pretend to hold the plough together. There is knowledge in spring that the village never writes down, because writing it down would make it stiff. How long you may look before a look becomes a statement. How near you may stand before nearness becomes a promise. How long a shared task must last before you are allowed to miss it when it ends. These rules are older than any priest and kinder than most. They allow the shy to live. They allow the bold to practice being shy. Of course, the parish has opinions. It would prefer that everything be named and scheduled, but spring has never cared much for timetables. It plays fair. The vows will come when vows should come, but it insists on this affection must be discovered in daylight in order to survive the night. No one says this aloud. Everyone acts as if they know it. One evening the lane is glassed with puddles that hold a stubborn sliver of sky, and the world is satisfied with being 2 colours, brown and soft blue. You walk without hurry, because hurrying would make the moment smaller. When you reach the familiar gate, the one that always sticks in the second hinge, you lean and pretend to examine the latch, while your heart considers a speech too long to deliver. She arrives as if she were passing by for a different reason, and then remembers with a precise and visible effort that she had meant to stop. You both smile at the convenient amnesia. There is nothing to exchange tonight. The ribbon has been paid for and hidden. The bread is already rationed. All that remains is the easiest and hardest gift time. You give 5 minutes to the evening, and the evening gives them back to you, expanded, as if time has learned that spring requires more room. You talk about hens, then weather, then the fair, and somewhere inside the talk, the blue ribbon is mentioned, as if it had been discovered by accident by a third person who doesn't exist. The gate, grateful for a break from its hinge labour, bears witness without telling anyone. On the way home, the village is all thresholds, doorways that admit both air and gossip windows that have not yet discovered glass dogs that know which feet belong to which paths. Light tarries in low bowls, on tables, in hearths that argue with the ash on the rims of buckets where water keeps memories of sky. From aloft, laughter falls like birdseed, irregular and sincere. A song rises from the alehouse that everyone knows but pretends not to take seriously, the kind of tune that teaches a chorus how to be a chorus. You pass it as one passes a river, pleased without needing to stop. Back in your room. Room is a generous word, but the heart has always been a generous cartographer. You do the day's arithmetic. There was work enough to justify tiredness, food enough to justify hope, and the blue ribbon has joined the household of things that mean more than their weight. You place it where, not too obvious, not too safe, between two folded shirts that remember shoulders, beneath a small box that keeps buttons and a coin you will never spend. For a moment the ribbon brightens the dark, as if colour were a kind of heat. You lie down, and the mattress remembers you with its usual affectionate rudeness. The roof speaks in a language you can translate if you are patient. A drip is a comma, a rafter creak is a sigh, a mouse is a proverb about persistence. Your hands still smell of rope. Your hair still keeps a few stray bits of hay that you will discover tomorrow, with a smile you will have to excuse to someone who will ask for the reason. You think for a moment of the maypole's braid, how the pattern came right at the end, even though it looked lost halfway through, and you forgive yourself for not understanding everything while it is happening. Spring prefers to be believed first and explained later. If you have a prayer tonight, it is not elaborate. You ask for a dry morning, for an ox, with enough patience to match your own, for the fair to bring needles that do not break for the ribbon, to hold its colour, for the right words to occur to you at the right time and not an hour after. You ask too, without naming it, for the village to keep its benevolent blindness in the small matters that do not concern it. Community is a crowd that knows how to look away when two people are learning to be brave. Sleep comes in a clean peace. If it wakes halfway as sleep often does, you roll toward the window to count the silhouettes of roof lines and the narrow wedge of moon that has learned to be stingy after winter's extravagance of darkness. Somewhere a lamb complains, someone answers, and you realize with quiet satisfaction that the world is full of conversations that no one has to overhear. In the morning, there will be mud again, and the well, and the barn, and the dance that lives secretly in every task. In the morning, the ribbon will still be where you left it, and you will be a day's courage richer. Spring does not promise happy endings. It promises beginnings, the harder, more honest thing. It hands you a handful of thawed earth and says, plant this, and also plant yourself. It lends you a barn for talk, and a ribbon for code, and a dance that welcomes missteps. It gives you jokes small enough to hide in your pocket, and sturdy enough to build a bridge out of silence. It gives you 5 minutes by a gate that refuses to be practical, and it gives you most of all permission to look up from the ground you are turning and discover that someone else has been looking up at the same time. Summer desire under the Sunday. Summer does not ask permission. It arrives like a verdict. The light stands taller in the lane, The shadows retreat to thin borders, and the air tastes faintly of iron, from the tools left warming in the Sunday where spring-flirted summer speaks plainly. The day begins before the cock can clear his throat, and ends only when the sky, unwilling to surrender, fades through several kinds of blue before agreeing to be night. Work leads, and everything else learns to follow at a reasonable distance. The fields pull people to their edges, as if by a string tied low around the waist. Wheat heads thicken. Barley becomes less a rumour and more a plan. The earth underfoot keeps a new kind of promise, firmer, less forgiving. Bare arms shine with effort, then dust. Shoulders forget what it felt like to be folded. The sounds of the village acquire rhythm scythes, whispering in 1,000 practised arcs, flails, tapping like patience at a door. Bees issuing opinions on everything. Midday is a treaty the sun negotiates with human bone. Work pauses not because anyone has lost the appetite for it, but because even ambition needs shade. People gather beneath hedges and rough trees that pretend at generosity. Bread breaks, the knife flashes, the shared cup passes with the deep solemnity of anything that keeps mouths from drying and voices from cracking. Here the talk is half laughter, half barter. Of gossip, yes, but also of favours. A strong back promised for a stubborn gate. A watchful eye promised for a cow, near carving. A song promised because the row will sit straighter if it hears the right. Melody. Courtship adjusts its gait. Spring allowed glances to do most of the lifting. Summer insists on sentences. A girl sits with her back to a field and her face to what breeze there is. A boy bolder than the season requires asks if the shade is a resource she plans to reserve. She answers that shade is common land today, but anyone who wishes to claim it must pay in stories. He has 2 good ones and a terrible third that is so sincerely told it earns a place at the table. When the bread returns to him, it is a fraction larger than when it left. He doesn't remark on it. He learns. In summer, even clothing becomes practical poetry. A belt rides lower because breath is a currency. A sleeve is rolled an extra turn because the wrist is where breeze can find a person quickly. The colours fade, and in fading they discover a dignity. The blue of a working shirt turns soft as creek water. The red thread at a cuff frays into a small Sunday. On feast days, a clean kerchief, tied with its knot a little to the left, says, "I permit pleasant misunderstandings today." A hat brim bent at a new angle admits that its owner has noticed a face they had no business noticing and cannot at this time provide an apology. The bathhouse, when the village is lucky, invents a different summer entirely. It smells of wet wood and steeped mint. Steam rises like white vines from vats. Men and women keep to their separate rooms, but warmth travels. Laughter is a migratory species and crosses borders with lazy elegance. The rule is simple and rigid. You wash, you rest, you remember your body, without turning it into a story about anyone else's. For many, that rule makes the room the only place in the village where peace feels fully legal. Heat lends the bathhouse a moral dimension. People who do not have time to be gentle learn gentleness from water. An old man shoulders like a prayer bench sinks into the tub and sighs so honestly that the sound quiets the room. A boy who was about to boast swallows the boast and finds to his surprise that he does not miss it. A woman whose hands have known milk and nettles in equal measure peels them open like the last page of a book. She watches steam loosen scars into plain skin. Conversations here are patient about the best way to dry rushes, about a dream that refuses to explain itself, about why a certain song works better for churning than another. If flirtation happens, it happens as a courtesy, a compliment offered in the same careful tone one uses for a well-turned bucket handle quickly followed by a remark about laundry, so no one must carry embarrassment out the door. Light joke number 1. A lad determined to display sophistication attempts the fashionable practice of cold plunge after steam. He descends with the dignity of a bishop and resurfaces like a carp, surprised by theology. For the remainder of the afternoon, he claims the procedure is for invigorating the soul. His soul is observed chattering. If the bathhouse is the village's soft voice, the alehouse is its unbuttoned laugh. Inside is shade and sound, pewter knocking wood, a fiddle soaring at daylight's nerves, a floor that remembers every story it has ever had to hold. The beer is not always good, but it is always the temperature of forgiveness. In summer, the door stands open to invite breezes and witnesses, people who cannot sing hum, people who cannot hum clap, people who cannot clap smile into their cups and do the counting that all joy requires behind the scenes. Songs do a lot of work. One celebrates a ploughman who walked straighter than a bishop. Another teases a maid for her refusal to confirm what everyone hopes is true. A third lists the qualities of love in an order that changes every night according to who is present and how much they have had to drink. These are not bawdy in the way outsiders imagine. They are earthy because soil is the subject everyone knows how to discuss without lying. A favourite chorus replaces all tender nouns with the names of tools handle hinge pin so that a person can sing honestly without surrendering privacy. Laughter rises, falls rises, again the way a chest does when conversation becomes a kind of breathing. Courtship at the alehouse proceeds by instruments subtler than ale. A woman can make a point by choosing a seat that allows a certain person to be in her peripheral vision. A man can signal decency by noticing a spill and cleaning it with an economy that suggests he practices kindness when no one is looking. If a hand must pass a cup to another hand, it does so with the precision of ritual, not too long, not too short, not too many fingers touching, not too few to be clumsy. Every move has a moral. This is how communities survive, by insisting that gestures carry responsibility even while the song is being a fool. Outside, the long light makes new kinds of rooms. Path edges acquire benches that were not there in winter. Barn doors left wide for airframe conversations that otherwise would have needed luck to exist. A pair can talk while watching swallows invent theology above the eaves. Quick turns, declarations, sudden silences. They can practice saying serious things lightly. If I were to bring you something from the fair, what would it not be? Not a ribbon, she says, which is a way of saying a ribbon would be fine, provided it is the right kind of wrong. The summer fair arrives like a ship docking at a town built for horses. Stalls bloom, spices announce themselves, tinkers hammer, unembarrassed. There is spectacle here, a dancer with bells at the ankles, a juggler whose 3 knives appear to be 3 different personalities, a storyteller who persuades reality to sit down for a minute. But there is also the quiet business of courtship by economy. A young man spends exactly the right number of coins on sweetmeats, not many because ostentation is brittle, not few because stinginess shrivels conversation. A young woman inspects a ribbon for its willingness to fade handsomely. She understands that bright things travel poorly through life, and chooses a hue that will age like grace. Light joke number 2. A cousin visiting from a neighbouring parish asserts that he can tell a person's romantic fortune from the way they bite an apple. He is given 7 apples and produces 7 fortunes of such elastic accuracy that he leaves believing in his powers, and everyone else leaves believing in apples. Back in the fields, summer resumes its dictatorship. If spring was a whisper and an invitation, summer is a ledger and an oath. Men swing scythes with the humility that sharp tools demand. Women gather sheaves with a conversation between arms and balance that could teach universities about elegance. Children promoted to weed pulling with the self-importance of flying geese discover that attention is a muscle that improves with gentle scolding. Meals are earned the way sleep is honestly, with receipts written in sweat. In such a regimen, affection survives by choosing its moments well. There is the nod at dawn, not much, but enough to include someone in the day's plan. There is the exchange of work. She takes his spot in the row, while he fixes a snag in the rake. And in that exchange, each tells the other, I see what you do more persuasively than words. There is the evening which arrives late, and in installments, bringing with it the small ceremony of washing. A jug of water, a cloth, the revelation that beneath dust a face remains. A face its story unchanged by the day's accounting. The church remains a metronome. Even in summer, bells do not sweat. Vespers provides a place to put what the day took and did not quite return. People enter hot and exit less so. The stone floor accepts their heat and gives them back a cooler understanding of themselves. A bench places two neighbours side by side without asking their permission to be neighbours. Prayers get shorter in hot weather. It's a mercy and a strategy. Gratitude compresses. For sun and shade, for bread and company, for the strength to lift and the sense to rest. The Amen sounds like a cup touching wood. It is in summer, notably, that sincerity makes its first true appearance as a virtue rather than a hazard. Spring's winks give way to promises, modest ones, but promises nonetheless. A boy says he will carry water for the midwife on market day. He does so, which is how a boy becomes something else. A girl says she will not mock the bee skipper's metaphors. She endures 3 of them with grace and tells him at last that the hive is a better teacher when it is not interrupted. He takes the correction like shade. The village's moral machinery works harder now because it must. The alehouse host notices when a joke begins to lean toward meanness and changes the song as deftly as a miller opens a gate for the creek. The widow, with the professional eyes, stations herself at the fair's edge during dusk, where shadows offer too many opportunities for foolishness. She redirects them with errands that seem afterward to have been urgent. The midwife knots her apron in a way that says she is in the neighbourhood if anyone needs a sentence to become a paragraph. And yet summer is not all governance. There is misrule tidy and contained. One evening, the younger men attempt a competition of scythe straightness. Lines are considered measurements, muttered. An older farmer, quiet, tidy, dry, as a proverb, walks his scythe once across a neglected corner and produces a cut so elegant it draws a small, involuntary sound from everyone present. How someone asks meaning. Teach me the part that isn't in the blade. He shrugs. Keep your eye where you mean to end, not where you begin. The advice is stolen immediately by those in love. Light joke. Number 3. The village fiddler, who esteems his abilities beyond their true range, insists on serenading a certain window each evening. One night he plays so softly, the window falls asleep. He reports success anyway, which a friend assures him is the superior outcome. Not all stories are cheerful, even in summer. There are quarrels that wait until heat thins patience, and then strike with a mean efficiency. There are hearts that discover their home is not where they hoped, and must invent a survivable dignity. A girl who counted on a promise hears it fracture into sensible reasons. A boy who mistook regard for attention learns what the difference costs. It is the midwife again who makes room for grief to be folded without breaking. She pours water, sets bread near the hand, tells a true story about a bad year that still found a way to end. The world likes to be finished, she says. Help it along. If spring made a ribbon, a vocabulary summer makes it a grammar. A red thread not only means courage, it means courage now at the fair before the song ends. A blue stitch not only asks for calm, it asks for calm while a certain door is being knocked upon by a father too fond of certainty. Clothes like people do not choose their days, they do their best with the weather they are given. By high summer, the bathhouse grows crowded at dusk. Work refuses to surrender the day, and so night learns to accommodate. Lamps conking softly along the walls make a field of small moons. Steam softens conversation until even the harshest word becomes a suggestion. In a corner, two friends count the ways one can be kind without being foolish. They discover to their surprise that the list is longer than sorrow ever admitted. In another corner, a man stares at his hands and realizes they have become his father's capable and stubborn, apologizing mostly by working right the next day. We could end the day at the alehouse with music and the slow reconsideration of everything said in daylight. But it is a rare night cool enough to recommend the lane. Walk there. The hedges smell of dust and life. A cat patrols the boundaries of mice and justice. Above in a width of sky the city forgot to hoard stars rehearse for autumn. In the road's shallow ruts, water keeps the last light's memory. Along this path, two shadows stop, not close, not far, and practice speaking the truth at a speed that will not startle it. Their words are simple. I will be here tomorrow. Do not wait in the sun for me. Keep to the shade, and I will find you. This is summer's gift. Not grand declarations, not trumpets at the gate, but the skill of placing care exactly where heat and labour will allow it to live. Desire under the sun learns to carry water, to choose bread wisely, to step aside for a wheelbarrow without losing the thread of a sentence. It learns the difficult arithmetic of togetherness in a world that must be harvested before it can be shared. And when the bells call the village home, when the last joke is shuttered with the last door, when the bed receives the day's account and agrees not to tell, summer folds its bright map and sleeps along the sill like a cat waiting for morning to turn the page. Tomorrow there will be more to do than today. The grain is heavy, the chance of rain is a rumour with teeth, but people will meet it with the steady courtesy of those who know that work is not the enemy of tenderness. It is its training ground. And when the harvest carts creak under their high golden arguments, when the fair rolls up its gaudy skin and shows itself what it is, again, plain wood, honest rope, somewhere a ribbon will be tied, more firmly somewhere. A song will learn a better line, somewhere a cup will pass from one hand to another with a precision that says, we are not rich, but we do not spill. Autumn is ahead, polishing its customs, preparing its vows and its laughter. Before the rituals can dress the season, summer must finish speaking. It says, endure kindly, boast briefly. Rest when the shade says so, and look toward the place you mean to end. It says, sweep the floor of your heart before guests, and count your coins by the light, not by your fear. It says, let work make you honest enough to love. And then it steps aside hot and satisfied to let the village walk forward into the part of the year when promises learn to wear clothes. Autumn rituals of union and unruliness. Autumn dresses the village in certainty. Where summer's light rambled, autumn's light is tidy and angled, laying clean edges along hedges and roofs, turning puddles into small mirrors that take themselves seriously. The air carries grain dust and apple brews, the mild smoke of stubble fields, the faint medicinal sweetness of crushed nettle drying in bundles. People walk with a new kind of purpose. Harvest has been hauled, stacked, measured, argued, over, and forgiven. Now the season makes room for the other business of living, the business of declaring what has been true for months, but needed work to prove it. The square loosens. Stalls that once sold tools now sell notions, ribbons, pins, spiced cakes, whose fragrance travels faster than coin. A fiddler tunes then tunes again, because the first tuning belongs to afternoon and the second to evening. Children are fitted for shoes that anticipate mud. The baker's daughter, who reads fortunes in crust, the way sailors read weather in sky, has begun pricking hearts into loaves with tiny variations that only their recipients will pretend to understand. By the well, a woman tests a scarf's dye by dipping an edge and wringing it the water, running away with a rumour of colour. She smiles, stubborn dye is a promise kept. Autumn is a lawyer for the heart. It produce document. Vows are considered not as swoons, but as contracts whose poetry derives from their usefulness. A troth plighting at the church door is not merely a prelude to something holier. It is holiness conducted in a place that smells of both stone and weather. The priest's doorway is a geography inside authority that points upward, outside the wind that cares nothing for signatures. The threshold negotiates between them, and the couple stands there because standing in two worlds at once is what marriage will require every morning. Watch how the crowd arranges itself. Elders to the fore, because eyes that have outlived fashions see straighter. Cousins in a cluster, bristling with opinions they will spend in whispers later. Children at knee-level straining to hold in the kind of questions that once asked would require an afternoon and a carrot to answer. The couple keep their hands where hands can be seen, not touching yet, but near enough to suggest that a bridge is being measured. The priest's voice is pleasantly ordinary. He saves his thunder for days when certainty needs thunder. Do you? He asks them both, with no attempt at embroidery. They each reply with a yes, whose plainness makes people exhale. Plain affirmations do more work than pretty ones. The vow is witnessed by the weather. That matters. A wind slides along the navestones, and through the open door combing the couple's hair with a bureaucrat's precision. A sparrow lands on the lintel and decides it has no opinion after all. Above them, carved in wood, darkened by centuries of thumb and candle, a saint leans on a staff and pretends not to watch too closely. The exchange of tokens is as practical as any exchange. She gives him a belt she has stitched to hold better. He gives her a knife whose edge has been spoken to kindly with a stone. Utility is the romance here. The crowd approves. Utility means no one is lying. After the doorway, there is the walk. It is not long weddings in a village rarely are, but it travels the necessary landmarks, the well where futures are measured by the bucket, the green where fortunes have embarrassed themselves and recovered, the threshold of the alehouse which nods like a tolerant uncle, the baker's which adds a handful of sugar to the story because sweetness is a ritual in its own right. At each place, a blessing disguised as a joke is applied in reasonable doses. May your arguments be shorter than the priest's sermons. May your roof leak when you are thirsty for a reason to stand under it together. May your hens lay with a sense of theatre. The bedding ceremony is the part that confuses strangers and comforts neighbours. It is a chaperoned misrule, a way for the community to admit that marriage has a body without pretending it doesn't. The couple are escorted, not shoved, not mocked, but escorted into the room where sleep, labour, birth, and grief have held their meetings since the house learned to stand. The bed is not a stage. It is a table with softer corners, a place where bargains about tomorrow are negotiated under wool. Women of the bride straighten sheets like generals preparing a campaign. Men of the groom busy themselves with firewood and moral support, and a number of witty remarks that have been politely inherited from previous generations and wear their age like velvet. There is laughter, and there is the careful architecture of privacy within a crowd. A curtain, perhaps, a candle snuffed with ceremony, a song raised not to reveal but to cover the way rain covers fields, making everything both visible and tender. An elder professional in these matters deploys advice, shaped like parables, begin as if you have all the time in the world. That way you might have some. If sheets, argue turn them. If you argue, turn yourselves. Sleep is not an enemy. It is an ally that arrives when it is most needed and least obvious. People cheer because cheering is a glue. The door closes softly. Blessings linger like perfume, and then, as all community must trust, takes its hands off. Not every autumn scene belongs to weddings. Carnival, that annual rehearsal for chaos, warms itself at the edges of respectability. Masks appear, some painted with the patient ambition of winter evenings, some hurriedly cut from old cloth, because impulse deserves its own wardrobe. Rolls wobble, the miller's wife wears a crown of twigs and makes decrees about bread thickness. The blacksmith borrows a feathered cap and learns that elegance is a heavy hammer too. The village never safer than when it is pretending not to know itself, laughs at its likeness in the mirror of costume. There are mock abductions, but the verb mock is enforced by the kind of women who have no patience for slippage. A girl is stolen with banditry, so polite it would not frighten a cat. She is escorted half a street and then rescued by a cousin in a hat he cannot control. Everyone who needs to be in on the joke is in on it in advance, because jokes that trespass cease to be jokes and become paperwork no one wants to write. Elder women judge the proceedings with the austere joy of referees who love the game and love its rules more. Light joke. Number 1. A lad in a wolf mask growls at a door, intending to terrify an audience of 2 small children and a sleepy hen. The door opens to reveal the widow with professional eyes, who tosses him a napkin and says, "For your drool, the wolf is tamed." The children applaud. The hen declines to comment. Autumn also courts subtler rituals. Charms move through the village like invisible clerks stamping documents. A red thread tied under a mattress knot, not to bind a person but to bind a habit. A sprig of rue hung quietly in a doorway because someone's temper has been walking ahead of them lately and could use a leash. A coin seated under a bowl, not to bribe fate, but to remind it that the household knows how to count. These are not superstitions to their keepers. They are tools for speaking to parts of the world that do not listen well to sermons. The midwife keeps a little museum of these objects, though she would never call it that. Drawers that smell of lavender and truth. Folded cloth whose creases have learned patience. Papers with smudged diagrams of knots that teach hands how to wait. She visits the newly betrothed under the plausible pretext of borrowing a pot and leaves behind a recipe for joy disguised as instructions for broth. She advises that some silences can only be taught to behave by music and prescribes a song of 7 lines to be sung while turning the mattress at the new moon. If the song fails, she adds turn the mattress twice. Autumn's laughter is different from summer's. It carries a language of mercy. At the alehouse, toasts acquire parentheses of prudence, to the groom's courage, which improves with practice, to the bride's patience, which is not to be assumed, to their argument tomorrow, which should be shaped like a hill, climbed once then descended. A bard of local reputation composes a verse in which tools speak, claiming credit for a marriage's success. The broom brags about sweeping grievances into one tidy corner. The kettle boasts of having warmed more apologies than soup. The bed says nothing, and is therefore believed most. Troth-plighting returns, as an evening ritual. Couples rehearse seriousness by walking the line between market and green, with hands almost but not quite touching. The priest is not required for this. The priest knows better than to be present at everything. The doorways of neighbours perform the witnessing, each threshold a notary with an excellent memory. Promises in autumn have fewer adjectives and more verbs. I will carry. I will ask. I will come back when I am angry, and we will finish being angry where we can reach the bread. It is a kind of liturgy, short, true, portable. Not every vow is happy. Autumn does not guarantee outcomes. It provides weather. A promise breaks under real weight. The village hears it and rearranges itself. Friendships that once crossed a particular lane now take the long way, not out of cruelty, but out of a wish to give hurt a wide berth to heal within. The midwife's drawers produce a remedy whose main ingredient is time, whose second is work done with people who do not require explanations, and whose third is music without words. She is not sentimental. Love is not a harvest. She reminds a girl who cannot get her breath to agree with her chest. Love is a tool. Learn its use or put it away where it cannot rust against everything else you own. At the edge of carnivals last night, a young couple borrow the orchard for a conversation that does not require an audience. The trees have dropped enough fruit to make the grass smell like memory. They calibrate their futures out loud. He confesses that he keeps a temper the way a man keeps bees, usually contained, occasionally stinging what it did not intend. She confesses that she hoards silence and spends it all at once, very poorly. They trade small promises like knives traded for belts, useful, not shiny. If I knock too hard, he says, teach me the right strength. If I hoard words, she says, take one and hand it back to me. The moon performing its ancient trade as an auditor records the exchange in the only ledger it trusts light through leaves. The bedding curtains washed and stored for another family carry a geography of warmth. They will be borrowed again, their folds, learning new maps of hands. The jokes will be retold with new names. The blessings will be edited for the next household's strengths and weaknesses. A community's memory is iterative. It keeps what is good because it keeps trying to use it. Even the wolf mask will be mended, the widow's napkin returned with a dowdily respectful bow. Autumn also supervises the house itself. Before cold asserts its absolute monarchy, roofs are inspected, doors rehung chinks in the wall, dressed with moss and clay. It is here that the moral of marriage becomes carpentry. A gap is not a failure. A gap is an instruction. You fill it with what you have. Check it when the wind blows. Learn from the draft where your attention has been arrogant. The couple who stood at the church door now stand on a ladder, in turns, passing up a basket of plaster. They say, mind your footing, not as a metaphor, but as useful speech. The metaphor is not offended. It knows a compliment when it hears one. Light joke number 2. The fiddler still courting that window, he claims to have serenaded into slumber attempts a dignified bow after a particularly handsome tune. The bow collides with the eaves. He bows to the eaves, as if he meant to, thus inventing a custom no one asks him to repeat. In the kitchen, a different covenant is prepared. Stews with ambition, loaves with plans, cider with opinions. Guests come in 3s and 5s, because numbers divisible by 2 encourage debates to become duels. The hostess arranges chairs with more theology than the priest's library, loud men, beside quiet women, candid elders, beside evasive youths, the midwife, anywhere she pleases. Toasts are made to things that do not ask for them. Weather wells, boots, and this democratic generosity keeps pride too busy laughing to remember insult. One evening, as leaves go crisp underfoot, the village stages its little parliament of lanterns, a procession around the green, each family carrying a light in a shield of oiled paper painted with simple shapes, stars, wheat fish, a spoon. Children believe the lanterns chase away whatever wishes to hurry winter. Adults know they chase away a more practical enemy, to fear's habit of arriving early and travelling in packs. The lanterns stitch a line between doorways. The song they choose is unremarkable and therefore perfect. It lists the things that are ours, not because we own them, but because we keep them: warmth, bread names, time, patience, and the sense to apologize before the fire dies. The night after the lanterns, the air turns sharp enough to explain why blankets are a form of diplomacy. People speak more softly without deciding to, as if conversation were carrying something fragile and needed both hands. This is when the village's unruliness goes to bed and tucks itself in, satisfied with its permitted mischief. Autumn winks once and returns to its ledgers, wood-stacked meat-salted roofs that will not embarrass themselves. The maypole is long gone. In its place stands a tidy stump with a memory of knots, and somewhere a ribbon lives as a bookmark in a prayer book. Its red gone too, rust its blue, complicated by time. Before autumn bows out the church door, witnesses a final, smaller vow. Two people who have not been dancing the public dance step aside to make a promise that is not a marriage and not a secret. They agree to be responsible for each other's sense. If one begins to speak cruelly about themselves, the other will interrupt with a chore. If one begins to work past wisdom, the other will place a cup in their hand and insist on sitting until the cup is empty. It is a modest pact, unadorned and therefore durable. The door approves. It knows the worth of hinges. We have walked the length of Autumn's street and seen its paperwork done properly. The village has made room for love to become a citizen, accountable, merry, well-shod. It has allowed misrule its brief carnival, because without a little chaos, order forgets why anyone tolerates it. It has woven charms into lintels and promises into bread. It has built beds that understand both tenderness and the occasional necessity of sleeping back to back. It has polished vows until they are strong enough to be ordinary. Winter waits just beyond the hedges, testing the latch on its own patience. The first early frosts write pale handwriting on the bucket rims. The cattle breathe steam like small engines of stubbornness. Inside houses, hands reach for the thicker blankets, the better jokes, the songs that know how to warm the ends of fingers. The year turns its page. Soon the fire will have more to say than the window. Soon nearness will be a method, not a luxury. Before we go in, look once more at the church door. The stone is worn where hundreds of vows have stood a smoothness you could skate on if it were not a threshold. That wear is a kind of public relic, not holy because it is rare, but holy because everyone's foot has made it what it is. Autumn's work is done. The unions registered the unruliness, taxed and released. The tools put away in places that will make sense in the dark. Now the village will show us what love looks like when warmth is scarce and time grows long. It will show us how people learn the grammar of kindness by heart, because the next months will require fluent speakers. Come in, the curtain is drawn, the first log has found its place. Someone laughs softly, the sound of a map folding. The year is ready for its hardest lesson, that nearness is a craft, and winter is its teacher. Winter warmth, magic, and memory. Winter begins with a sound, the clean, bright note of frost finding a bucket's rim before the sun does. The village answers with an old choreography, doors pushed open by shoulders wearing more wool than pride breath, admitted in little white affidavits, the lane's mud stiffened into manners. Smoke learns to draw straighter lines in the air. Windows forget how to be open. Somewhere a hinge shocked by cold pleads for oil and receives a promise instead. Winter has few luxuries. Promises are one of them. Inside the room narrows, kindly. Space that in summer belonged to corners now belongs to blankets, to bundles of rushes, to chairs, pulled near enough to the hearth that conversation can warm its hands without burning them. The fire gives a seminar each evening in sufficient grace. This much wood will do, this much talk will do, this much silence will make everything else believable. The kettle is busiest now, a bell that rings for tea, for broth, for the relief of the notion that heat can be poured. Beds become treaties. There is no other word for it. The bed is not a throne, not a stage, not an altar, though it will host politics, drama, and worship in the months ahead. It is a negotiated border between exhaustion and patience, between two bodies and the cold. In a one-room house, nothing is private except what people agree to treat as private, and the bed is where that agreement is tested nightly. Straws are refilled, blankets doubled, a fur or two added if luck wandered through last year's market and didn't mind staying. Segmented sleep, the old habit, reclaims its jurisdiction. Night breaks itself into two pieces, like bread, a first sleep heavy and correct a waking in the deep hours when the fire needs feeding and the mind needs what it mistakenly calls thinking, and a second sleep that agrees to conclude business. The middle wakefulness is practical. Someone tends embers with the tenderness of a midwife, coaxing dull red into usefulness. Someone else steps outside and conducts a census of stars, which are fuller than in summer and more opinionated. Sheep huddle like polite arguments. The moon, always pleased to be noticed, recognizes the look on the watcher's face and offers a suggestion: breathe slower. The watcher obeys, which is how mornings are made bearable. This is the time when words learn to be almost silent, because ears are very near. Couples share what work has no time to hear the inventory of aches, which aren't complaints. Not really the admission that a fence repair was a triumph. No one will celebrate the wish that a certain quarrel with a certain cousin would end. Like weather ends with the sky, you can trust again. Sometimes they speak of nothing important at all, and find to their surprise that nothing important at all is what carries them from the first sleep to the second with the least difficulty. Children, when they are allowed to know, find the middle hours full of enchantments. Permission to rise quietly becomes a scholarship in adulthood. They learn the algebra of embers, which log to turn, who which to leave, how to make a small blaze from what looks like a mistake. They learn the art of not waking the small brother who will insist on questions. They learn that winter modifies sound. A whisper near the hearth walks like a taller voice. A laugh must be held down with two hands. They come to think of the world as a thing that behaves better when watched, which in winter is mostly true. Not every bed holds a pair who share all their seasons. Winter invents provisional arrangements with the same practicality it applies to roofs. There are snow spouses, not quite the phrase people use, but near enough arrangements understood by everyone and written by no one. Two neighbours, both solitary by summer's terms, and neither sentimental about it, agree to trade warmth for companionship when the cold begins to visit without knocking. The rules are precise, and generous bread is shared, blankets are shared, futures are not. Privacy is drawn like a good seam, tight but not punitive. Spring will return each to their separate doors with gratitude, and a story whose moral is not that romance solves weather, but that kindness does. Light joke number 1. A man famous for stubbornness arrives at the midwife's door with a blanket and a question. He asks with the ceremony of a parliament how one properly inquires about a seasonal arrangement without appearing foolish. The midwife, who has lived long enough to collect 3 religions and 5 sets of house rules, hands him a pie. "Carry this to her," she says. Pie makes grammar unnecessary. He returns later with the empty dish and a look of astonished relief. "It worked," she asks. "She corrected my posture," he says. The midwife considers that an excellent omen. Winter is when the midwife's genius displays itself in its full range. In other months, she attends births, mendings, the ordinary negotiations of bodies. Now she manages the household climate of the village. She prescribes tea for tongues sharpened by cold baths, for backs that forget how to unclench songs for hearths that will not stop remembering bad years. Her remedies are more often than not exquisitely practical. Put the kindest person nearest the draught. Give the quickest temper the task of chopping wood where its decisions are welcome. Seek grief with a view of the door, so it knows it can leave when it likes. Her drawers becoming a winter library. There are papers with diagrams of knots, the old binding charms, meant not to enslave anyone's will, but to bind foolishness before it can boast. There is a red ribbon for courage, never tied to a person, always to a post. A blue thread for calm, run through the edge of a pillowcase, with the humility of a rumour, a sprig of rosemary with a note. Remember why you picked each other. Say it out loud. The cold forgets quickly. She is not mystical about any of this. She calls it housekeeping for the soul. In winter, she says to a couple who knock, because knocking seems safer than letting silence make up their minds, "Your house has fewer rooms than your feelings. Build more rooms with rules." Rules, followed by laughter, make warmth. A house learns to keep its tempers as carefully as it keeps its heat. No arguments after the embers are laid. No decisions while the kettle is still thinking. No sarcasm until everyone has warmed their hands. And any joke that punches down must be stolen by the cat, who, being a cat, will do the stealing expertly and without apology. The family agrees to these statutes, with the relief of people who have been given something they can do besides endure. Light joke number 2. A boy attempts to teach the household hen to sit near the hearth as if it were a spaniel. The hen accepts the warmth, rejects the roll, and contributes a single opinion to the rug. The boy is sentenced to an afternoon of rug redemption and emerges with the eternal wisdom that warmth without boundaries is a hazard. Outside the village wears its essentials. Paths are hammered into recognizability by boots that learn to walk like careful music. Hedges grow a sugar rhyme that makes even old thorns look briefly gentle. The church bell sounds denser, as if the cold has added a second bell inside the first. People walk with that particular winter grace, feet sure of where they land, hands sure of what they carry, faces wrapped in cloth that turns breath into a little personal weather. Across the green, a lantern procession stitches doorways together. The light is modest but stubborn. Children are entrusted with lamps, and by extension with the lesson that carrying light is a job, not a performance. By day there is work that waits for winter to be done. Mending, whittling, planning, the kind of carpentry that improves the house's manners. Handles are tightened hinges, tamed with oil, a bench replaned, so it invites sitting instead of scolding posture. Patterns for spring are spoken aloud, not because the house needs to know them, but because the house keeps secrets well. A loom sings its narrow song. The rhythm makes sense even to those who have never learned its grammar. Nets are repaired for ponds that under ice dream of fish. Children learn to find usefulness inside. By night, the village turns to memory. Stories come out of their drawers, smelling faintly of cedar and exaggeration. We sit close enough that we need not raise our voices. The teller, whoever drew the lucky chair, begins with weather because weather is safe and also true. From whether it is a short walk to the year, the wolf came into the lane bold as a steward, and left with nothing but a lesson. To the evening, the fiddler bowed to the eaves, and the eaves bowed back. To the day the bee-skipper proposed a courtship, as gentle as bees, and was taught that honey keeps better when one is quiet. The stories are not about heroes. They are about neighbours who made endurance interesting. Songs are chosen with care. The winter set includes the tune that convinces dough to rise on days when yeast is discouraged, the one that keeps wool from remembering the sheep too vividly, the several that soften adult spines into shapes compatible with chairs. Lullabies are a public service in winter. They operate at two frequencies, one for children, one for the dread that pretends to be for adults only. A chorus replaces tender nouns with the names of tools again, an old joke that still works because the joke is kindness, privacy, preserved, comfort, shared. A reel is permitted just long enough to remind legs that they exist. Then the kettle interrupts politely, and tea retires laughter to a better lit room. From the rafters hang small witnesses. Bundles of thyme and sage, a clump of mistletoe that in this village means mind your manners under it. Beneath the sprigs, the old love knots are tied and retied, not about domination, not here, but about habits that insist on running ahead of their owners. The midwife's note, pinned beside them, says, "Tie what is unruly in yourself first. Couples obey with endearing literalness." He knots his temper to the table leg, promising to speak at the pace of the kettle. She knots her silence to the bedpost, promising to spend words before they mildew. The knots hold just long enough to teach the hands who tied them what they already knew. There is, of course, the liturgy of repairs. Wool socks acquire darning that looks like islands appearing on a reliable sea. A sleeve learns a new cuff from a quieter shirt. Quilts gain patches with biographies. This square was the apron from the year of the scarce pears. This one from the shirt worn the day the first calf was born, and nobody knew it would live. The house becomes a museum of survival with labels made of thread. Children learn history by touching it. When the weather truly decides to instruct, there is a night of wind that thinks too well of its own arguments. Latches lift and are scolded. Snow performs its famous trick of swallowing sound until even a door's groan seems polite. In the midst of it, the village practices winter's central art nearness. Not only the nearness of bodies under blankets, though that matters, but the nearness of attention. Someone listens on purpose to the story a younger brother cannot tell straight. Someone re-braids hair slowly so that hands can do the listening while the heart remembers how. Tea is poured before the request. A joke is told that lands exactly in the place where a fear would have taken root. This is the craft of it. Nearness is not only proximity, it is the discipline of noticing in time. Light joke number 3. The priest, visiting with a jar of preserved quince as proof that he respects both doctrine and dessert, is invited to play at knucklebones with children. He loses comprehensively, then declares that humility is seasonally appropriate. The children agree to absolve him for a song. He sings badly and with good cheer. Winter approves. At some point, every winter, a household runs low on good temper. It is not a sin, it is arithmetic. The midwife's rules are invoked like saints. Eat, then speak. Wrap your feet, then decide. Look at the face you are talking to. It is not your enemy. If the household fails to improve, an elder is fetched the way one fetches a pair of spectacles. The elder sits by the fire and tells a story whose point arrives late, but exactly. In the bad year we shortened our sentences, she says. The bread rose better that way. So did we. Outside again, the world becomes a black and white drawing with a few coloured pencils left for roofs and cheeks. The lane holds a university in the ways of ice. Where it's dull, it is dangerous. Where it's bright, it is merely proud. Children learn to slide along the safe edges of things. Adults practice the dismount that preserves dignity and knees. At the pond, men test thickness with poles treated as prophets. When the ice agrees, someone scratches a circle for a game, and suddenly the village invents a league. Disputes are settled by laughter or by the midwife, who carries the whistle everyone knows better than to ignore. If spring gave the ribbon vocabulary and summer gave it grammar, winter gives it punctuation. A knot, that means pause. Here, a bow, that means I am listening. A loop, that means I will return to this sentence tomorrow. A scarf tied with a small flourish is not vanity, but tenderness directed toward the self, which is the condition of all other tenderness. A hat pulled low is not refusal, but permission speak to me later when the fire has had its say. There are losses too, because winter is honest. A neighbour falls ill, and the village shrinks its social maps, so that errands travel by the sickbed. Bread goes by hand, news goes by mouth, softened by the low fire of courtesy. The church bell trades its brass for velvet, and rings the hour that makes everyone pause with their hands in mid-task. Grief sits welcomed and supervised on a low stool near the hearth. It is fed and warmed until it remembers how to be bearable. Songs are chosen for service rather than brilliance. The midwife's drawers produce the old cloth. The village remembers the lines. We keep what we can. We carry what we cannot keep. We are carried by what we forgot was carrying us. Winter nods. It is a fair accounting. Then there are the small celebrations that belong only to cold. The first day the sun feels like a hand again. Someone grins at a bucket of water as if it had told a joke. The bread rises with needless pride. The cat who in winter pretends to be a philosopher commits foolishness with a dangling string and is applauded for the curriculum it offers. A couple who have been practicing patience discover that patience has become less practice and more habit. They speak the same sentence at the same time, and both pretend to be surprised. The bathhouse, even pared down for winter, becomes chapel and clinic. Water is hotter, time shorter, gratitude larger. People take turns at steam, as if it were a sacrament. Someone confesses to the ceiling that they have been hard to live with, the ceiling which has heard worse and better drips at the appropriate interval. In a corner, two friends exchange advice. That is really permission. You may rest. You may ask for help. You may postpone despair until spring, when it will be less efficient. They laugh, which is the medicine that makes all the others work. After midwinter, the village begins to keep the noon like a holiday. The light angle revises itself. A small slope toward leniency appears in the day. Plans for spring are spoken with the politeness one uses for guests who have not arrived but are sending promising letters. Seeds are inspected like correspondence. Tools are sharpened with the admonitory tenderness of a teacher preparing a favourite pupil for an examination. The bed treaty stage repair shop prepares to become again what it always was, a place to sleep without thinking too much about sleeping. Before the thaw, there is one more ritual. The old charms are untied, not because they failed, but because they succeeded at being temporary. The red ribbon is wrapped and stored with a note about the day the quarrel learned to wait its turn. The blue thread is salvaged from the pillowcase and sewn into the hem of a work shirt, because calm having served at night might as well assist by day. The midwife collects the sprigs, thanks them like friends at the door, and cooks them into a broth for a new mother whose laugh needs to remember itself. One last evening of proper winter. The sky is a bell that has forgotten how to stop ringing. Inside the household performs its closing ceremonies, the good wood used without stinginess, the best story retold with the latest improvements, the song that knows how to finish a year without boasting. The elder lifts a mug and toasts not the future, which can manage without compliments, but the present, which always needs one. To the work that kept us decent to each other, to the decency that kept us at work, to the warmth we made ourselves, the mug's touch. The sound is the size of a village. After the second sleep, the morning begins with a drip, a single brave punctuation mark from the eaves. Outside, the snow sulks in the shade and admits it will be outvoted by grass. Paths darken back into mud. The bucket freed from its jewellery looks younger. People step out with the kind of caution that has already begun to forget itself. There will be false starts, small insults from the wind, a day or two when winter remembers an errand and comes back to collect it. But the hedges are full of rehearsal. The birds have opinions again. The sheep behave like ideas that are just about to form sentences. Inside blankets are folded with a care that looks like affection and is. Beds are turned and spoken to you did well. The kettle is told that its labour is appreciated and will continue. The broom leans against the wall like a worker preserving dignity between tasks. The house has the look of a room that has hosted a demanding guest and is proud to have done it without complaint. Before we leave, look again at what winter taught and left. Nearness, not just closeness, but the art of timely attention. Kindness with rules, so kindness does not wear itself out. Memory that keeps chiefly what will be useful at the next cold and releases the rest like breath into frost. Love that stopped auditioning and started working, fetching wood, pouring tea, tying knots, untangling them, apologizing before the ember dies. When the door opens to the draught of almost spring, this is what goes out with us. Tucked into sleeves, braided into hair, stitched quietly into the hem of every plan. The lane is wet again. Somewhere a child insists on calling the first mud a miracle, and somewhere an elder insists the child is correct. The church bell remembers its lighter voice and tries it out half bashful, half pleased. Above the hedges, a small bird attempts a conversation with the sky and is answered politely. The village steps forward the way a patient stands and smiles at the nurse who comes for the stitches. Winter bows without apology. It has done its work. We are made ready for the kind of tenderness that must keep pace with Thaw. There is by the barn door a sprig of green, new, impossible, precise. Someone ties it to the nail no one uses anymore, with thread of practical red. The knot, tidy but not perfect, waits beside the ghost of last year's knot. Courage today, kindness tomorrow. The bed, that excellent treaty, will be remade for spring tendencies. The midwife will close a drawer and open a window. The songs will shed their extra wool and walk outside with bare arms. And when evening comes, as it always does, the fire will make its smaller, friendlier sermons, while the kettle, indefatigable cleric of comfort, rehearses its single faithful sermon: stay, rest, pour, share. Winter's lesson ends where spring's begins, with the understanding that warmth is not a season, but a craft. We carry it forward in hands that remember embers in voices, practiced at low volume in feet that have learned to find the safe edge of ice and the generous side of puddles. The year turns, our work with it, our love with our work. And in the first rain that dares the eaves to be brave, someone laughs exactly as they did last year, not because the world is the same, but because once again it is survivable together. Love as survival. Morning returns as if it had mislaid something and finally remembered where. The light is plain-spoken and forgiving. It moves along the lane like a careful hand straightening a tablecloth, hedges first, then doors, then the rooflines that spent the night thinking. Water drips from the eaves with the patience of punctuation. A cartwheel reprimanded by rust all winter tries a hopeful turn. Somewhere a robin rehearses one bright line and decides it will do. The year has circled, and the village arrives where it always does, at the exact place where ordinary life feels briefly illuminated from within. Walk with me once more, now that our feet know the way. The threshold is still scuffed by old vows. The church door still keeps its two loyalties stone behind weather ahead. The green is a study in resilience here, a patch where the lanterns once stitched light, there a place where the maypole's shadow used to be a sermon about knots. The alehouse window has remembered how to sweat. The bathhouse has opened its lungs to steam that smells faintly of mint and intention. The barn door we visited first bears a new notch at shoulder height, a measure taken by some future that will soon be the present. The village has not changed, and it has changed entirely. That is the grammar of home. We have followed a year of private citizenship, the ways people belong to one another without paperwork. In spring, the ground and the heart thawed together. Shyness learned to travel in daylight, carrying a ribbon and an almost sentence. A hand steadied a ladder rung, and in doing so, steadied something larger. Work spoke first, and affection answered in the same language. In summer, certainty stood up and said its name. Shade became a commons, and conversation its currency. The bathhouse taught gentleness by water. The alehouse taught courtesy by song. Tools argued their usefulness and confessed indirectly to tenderness. In autumn, the village wrote things down that it had been saying all year. Vows became documents that fit in the hand like a belt knife or a loaf. Misrule came briefly into its rights and left without stealing anything but the right kinds of fear. Charms hung in doorways, not to boss fate, but to remind courage where it sleeps. Then winter made nearness a craft. Beds turned into treaties. Jokes were assigned honest shores. The kettle obtained once again its holy office. Kindness learned rules so it wouldn't tire itself out. Memory warmed the room when fire was busy with other tasks. A year then, not of spectacle, but of maintenance of love, as a tool used every day, well-oiled, kept close, returned to its hook when the work of evening is done. That is not the storybook's promise when they are in a hurry, but it is the story that keeps houses from sagging and faces from hardening. It is the kind of love you can cook with the kind you can fold into a sleeve hem, the kind you can knot loosely and untie without shame when a better knot suggests itself. When people say the medieval world, they sometimes mean iron and law and the evangelism of hardship. All of that is here. But equally, here is the minor music of survival. A sprig at the lintel, a shared cup, a pause before the unkind word, a hand held at the correct temperature. Look at how the seasons taught it. Spring gave vocabulary glance, ribbon sprig loaf. Summer gave grammar, seat pass, sing listen. Autumn gave syntax promise, witness joke that blesses, blessing that jokes. Winter gave punctuation, pause, rest, begin again. A life made of these parts is not theatrical, but it is legible to those who stand close enough to read it. The village reads itself that way slowly out loud, with edits added by elders who know where the sentence tended to wander last time. Some things we have not counted will nonetheless count. The way laughter used sparingly changed the size of a room. The way prayer stripped of polish kept one hand on the workbench. The way a scythe cut straighter when a song led it. The way a promise cut cleaner when it was shaped like a verb. The way sorrow found a stool near the fire and given bread behaved like a guest instead of a thief. The way quarrels shortened when the bread was ready to be sliced. The way a child's question, "Why do beds breathe louder in winter?" taught an adult to answer gently, because gentle answers survive. If you step close to the barn door, the new sprig is there again, green with that first day kind of insistence. The thread is red tidy, but not perfect. Last year's thread has retired into the grain a rumour more than a mark. That is how love keeps records in such places, not as monuments, but as habits. Courage today, kindness tomorrow. Not a slogan, but an instruction. You can use it to stir porridge or to hold your tongue. You can stitch it into a cuff or a plan. It fits anywhere because it was made for everywhere. Bizarre, remember, the word looked large at the start, wearing someone else's hat. It has shrunk to its proper size now. At a distance, what is ordinary can masquerade as stranger community, escorting a couple to the edge of privacy, and then guarding that privacy with song. A bath where laughter and steam disagree briefly and productively about what a body is for. A ribbon that tells the truth more elegantly than a speech. A bed that conducts policy negotiations between hope and fatigue. Up close, it is only survival with good manners. The village never needed novelty. It needed competence in tenderness. It got there the same way it got through drought and hail, together with revisions, with a better idea, arriving from a mouth that was not expected to have one. If you wish for a relic, you can have one the smooth place on the church step where hundreds of vows have stood until stone learned the word yes. You can carry that smoothness in memory the way you carry a tune after the fiddler has gone to bed. Or take a simpler relic, the fact that someone today will cut a slice of bread thin because someone likes it thin, and place it where it will be found without ceremony. No saint's bones could work a greater wonder. There were failures, and they were not small. A promise cracked and had to be set like a bone. A temper escaped its owner and had to be walked back on a ribbon like a dog. A secret became heavy and was lightened only by telling it to a person who knew how to carry half. None of this is a surprise to the village, which has made a science of survivable sorrow. The midwife keeper of beginnings knows how to attend endings too, and the elder who once said, "Shorten your sentences," has shortened hers until they are durable as buttons. Eat first, sit together, try again. The year does not erase what went wrong. It teaches hands to fix what can be fixed, and to hold without cruelty what cannot. When history is told loudly, it forgets how much of itself was whispered. It records the crown and the scaffold, and misplaces the bench under the window where two people, in mid-argument, quietly chose to pour tea. It counts ships and forgets buckets. It praises iron and ignores thread. Our small tour has tilted the lens the other way. We have not denied the largeness of the age. We have recognized that largeness stood on the patient back of the daily. A world can be brutal and still be human. Often the humanity is the only part that keeps the rest from being unendurable. If you are listening for advice, there is some, but it comes dressed as description. Keep your tools clean. Speak kindly before the kettle boils and after it cools. Save a stitch of blue for days when calm will need a place to land. Tie the temper, unbind the silence. Seek grief where it can see the door. Make a grammar out of the ways you pass a cup. Stand in thresholds only long enough to remember that life is lived on both sides. Take vows like belts to be worn, adjusted, and used. Trust work to teach love how to stand up straight. Trust love to teach work why standing matters. The lane brightens. The pond loses its memory of ice. The elder who knows how to count rain by smell declares herself satisfied with the week. At the baker's, a new loaf cools pricked with a pattern that will be read correctly by exactly one pair of eyes. The fiddler, unsupervised by Eves at the moment, attempts a tune that sounds like a fence being mended and almost gets it right. Children rehearse the urgent business of being louder than birds. A cat invents a philosophy of shadows and refuses to lecture on it. The year steps forward with the casual certainty of something that has done this many times and is still pleased by the trick. We will leave the village the way we entered it, through the door that sticks and then yields. Behind us, the fire will settle into its day posture, a red vow that does not need witnesses. Ahead, the lane will find the coloured confidence it favours in spring. If the story has done its work, you can hear now the small citizens of survival broom cup, belt ribbon, bench spoon. They know their lines. They have always known them. They are waiting for hands to pick them up and continue the lesson. Before we part, if stories like this have kept you company, if the quiet courage of ordinary lives helps you rest or helps you remember what you already know, stay close. Here at Poor Historian, we keep the lamp low and the pace honest. We return to places where history is not shouted, but spoken at a temperature that tea prefers. If you'd like more of these slow journeys through smoke-filled rooms, along hedges that know everyone's names across thresholds that hold our weight, subscribe, leave a thought, and bring someone who needs a gentler story. We will meet you again where the door sticks and then yields, and we will walk another circle patient as bread precise as a knot, warm as a bed that remembers its treaty. For now, take the small relic with you. Courage today, kindness tomorrow. It fits easily in a pocket. It makes a good bookmark, and in the next season, whichever kind of season it happens to be, you will know where to start.